Today I am joined by a bit of a legend of Australian football, Ernie Merrick. Thank you so much for joining me today, Ernie.
My pleasure, Shannon.
How did your love and passion for football first begin?
I think growing up in Scotland, it was just the game that we played all the time. I was a very energetic youngster, so we used to get up early before school and try and get a couple of teams together to play in the schoolyard before school started, at interval, at lunchtime, and at dinner, and afterwards at dinner time, and then after school, that's just soccer for you in Scotland in the 60s, I guess.
Now, it says online that you're a semi-pro footballer, but there's not really much written about that. So, what were you like as a footballer? How do you rate your skills, and what position did you play even?
There's not much written about me as a football player because I wasn't much of a football player. I thought I was a midfielder, but finished up as either fullback or centre back. I played what was called semi-professional in Scotland. I played for my college. There's only one PE college in Scotland, and we played in the amateur leagues. And then I went semi-professional with a team called Shettleston Juniors. And it was rough and tough, and you tackled most of the time above the neck. And there was lots of long balls and heading involved. And when I was one of these players that used to get offered trials at different clubs, but the manager used to say the same thing to me. They said, "Oh, you've done really well, son. Don't phone us. We'll phone you. I'll be in touch." And I'm still waiting on them calling back. And when I realized as a 22-year-old I wasn't really going to make it, I jumped on a plane to come out to Australia to join a friend of mine called Derek Hay over here in Melbourne, whose brother is Colin Hay, the rock singer from Men at Work. So the three of us bummed around for a while, and Colin made it big time, and the other two, Derek and I, just taught PE for a while.
That leads me on to my next question. It's also said that you're a PE teacher. How did you enjoy that role? Like, was it much different to coaching when you eventually stepped into coaching, or was it much the same? You know what I mean?
I taught PE for a year in Scotland and Glasgow in a lower socio-economic area called a place called Easterhouse. It was pretty rough and tough, but the kids were great and they were all terrific footballers. I hope some of them made it in the big time, but Glasgow that year was pretty miserable weather, and it rained for 24. There was not a break over 7 months of 24 hours from the rain. So Derek Hayes sending me these photographs of postcards of beautiful beaches and girls in bikinis and suntans, and I'm thinking life's got to be a bit more than what I'm putting up with in Scotland at the moment. So I come over to Australia and I joined a team called Frankston City initially. I taught at a school called Balmorris High School. I taught in 2 or 3 other schools after that, and then I went into a playground company business for a little while. But when I got the offer to go full time, because I was always sort of coaching on top of being a PE teacher, I was either coaching at Doveton, where I played after Frankston City, player coach, and then 2 NSL clubs, Preston and then George Cross, and then I got the opportunity to go full time at the Victorian Institute of Sport, which I did, and I was there for 13 years before the A-League started. So it was a long, drawn-out affair. I didn't actually want to be a coach initially, and I'm sure there's a few players didn't want me to be a coach as well, especially my mates that I played with at Duffton 1 minute and coached the next minute. It doesn't always work. A friend of mine, Stevie Irvin, was in that team, and he's got a great sense of humour. So he used to pick on me nonstop. But his son finished up playing for the Socceroos. His son is Jackson Irvin. So it was, I like to think I had some involvement in Jackson's development at some stage, but mainly his dad and his mum were they're the organisers and developers of his skills.
You mentioned you got shown postcards of, beautiful beaches and people in bikinis when you're over in Scotland. But when you first come to Australia, what did you make of the country? I know Australia has a bit of a weird reputation overseas where, to be honest, the foreign media doesn't really have a good picture, I think, of Australia. So when you first come here, was it pretty much different to what you expected, or was it how you imagined it?
Well, Derek Hay, the bugger, was sending me postcards from Queensland. They were all, they were early beach and the Gold Coast and the Sunshine Coast. So he was conning me a little bit. And Cairns, I remember the one from Cairns. So when I first came over, it was autumn, and Beaumaris is right next to Port Phillip Bay, which is so it's got beaches right on Beaumaris. So in day two, I was down the beach sunbathing, and he said to me, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm sunbathing." I said, "That's what I came for. I haven't seen the sun for the last 22 years in Scotland." And he says, "It's 15 degrees. It's autumn." I says, "I wondered why there was no one on the beach. And where's all the girls in bikinis? I haven't seen one yet." He says, "No, that'll happen next summer." He says, "Don't worry about it." So I was really impressed by Melbourne, not initially by the weather, but it's certainly a huge improvement in Glasgow. But then it's just turned into a great city over the years. Unfortunately, after Melbourne Victory, I had to leave for 7 years to coach, whether it be overseas in Hong Kong or in New Zealand, Wellington, Phoenix, and then interstate at Newcastle. So after 7 years, I'm back in Melbourne, where my wife's family are, and it's just a wonderful city. The restaurants, the culture, the tremendous sporting opportunities here. You can watch so many different sports, from the Melbourne Storm, AFL football, and then Victory and Melbourne City, and now Western United, and there's just great facilities. It's a great place.
Now, you just mentioned a lot of sports. We've got the tennis, we've got rugby, we've got rugby league, we've got AFL, we've got swimming. I could be here for ages. Cricket. Unfortunately, unlike the UK, football is pretty much down the pecking order, whereas in the UK, people pretty much live and breathe football. So when you first come here to Australia, in a country where football is kind of put on the back burner, particularly back then, how difficult did you find that?
I remember the drive from arriving in the airport, driving down to Beaumaris, down through Port Melbourne, the Bay, and passing all these parks. And instead of the parks being rectangular with goals with goal crossbars and posts, there was these goals with two huge big posts and two little posts. And I said, "What's that?" And he says, "Oh, it's called Australian rules football." I said, "What's the big goals for and the little goals?" And Derek says, "Well, the little goals are just an encouragement thing. So even if you miss, they give you a point. In fact, if you hit the post, you get a point." And that just a wee encouragement to, "Oh, well, unlucky son, try again, but we'll give you a point." And then I said, "How do the boys run around this area? It's enormous. Jesus, look at the size of the place." He says, "Oh, they're all pretty fit and they're pretty tough." And my first game I went to was St Kilda, which is only 10 minutes away at Linton Avenue, where they were originally. And I couldn't believe how tough the game was. And being a PE teacher, I've loved all sports, and I certainly enjoy AFL football as well. This is rugby union, rugby league, and basketball, cricket. Although I'm not too keen on the cricket. In Scotland, the injury rate in cricket's horrendous, mainly hypothermia and frostbite. But apart from that, sports here are good. I mean, it gives soccer as well down the pecking order, but it gives a great opportunity to boys and girls to play a range of different sports, whereas Scotland are all mad on just soccer, really.
And how did you rate the level of football in the NSL compared to the level of football in Scotland? I know obviously it's hard to judge leagues against each other, but you going from a country where pretty much football's full professional, the top league, all that sort of thing, to obviously the NSL, how did you rate the difference in level?
Well, as I say, I coached the NSL at Preston and George Cross, and I felt that the players that were coming over from Europe in those days were fantastic players. The teams were played really good football. The difference between the NSL and the A-League is the A-League players were all well paid and full-timers with far better facilities and beautiful pitches. But the players were every bit as good in the old NSL. I always felt it was like in Scotland, there's now a Premier League and then the Championship. So in comparison, I always felt they could certainly match. Most of the teams could play well in the championship, and some like Sydney Victory, now Melbourne City, and maybe even Perth Glory, they could compete in the bottom half of the Premier League. I hope I haven't missed out a team there. I'm sure just about all the teams could compete well. But the level of professionalism and structure, strategy, technical development now is just, it's improving enormously. So I think we're not rated highly in Europe, but I think we're growing very quickly, and so is the rest of Asia.
Now, when the NSL ended and the A-League started, a lot of clubs were pretty much made from scratch or taken existing clubs and pretty much gave them a new name. So when the Melbourne Victory was made, obviously you were their coach, but how did that move to Victory first come about?
Well, I was at the Victorian Institute of Sport and I got a call from Gary Cole, who was the operations manager. Jeff Lord, who has an AFL background, I think he was president of Hawthorn at some stage. He and Gary Cole encouraged me to apply for the position. I think they had different motivations. Gary encouraged me to apply because he thought I was reasonably good as a coach, I think. But Jeff Lord had his eye on the players from the Victorian Institute of Sport. So he says, you come over and bring half the boys from the VIS and the staff. And that's what we did. We had far too young a team in the first year. And but we had really good coaching staff, fitness staff, sports medicine staff, and virtually all came from the VIS. And we didn't have, in those first 2 years, we really didn't have good facilities for training. And we got Melbourne Grammar School allowed us to use their facilities. We used a couple of other schools until we got Amy Park, but the development happened rapidly. I finished second bottom in the first year, and I've got lots of excuses from a book of excuses on why we finished second bottom. But Jeff Lord, being the AFL, he said, we want you here for another couple of years. So what do you need? And I said, I only need 3 players, really. He says, have you got anyone in mind? I said, yes, Lionel Messi, Ronaldo. No, I didn't. I said, we've got 2 good strikers, Danny Allsop, Archie Thompson. I probably need a midfielder, an attacking midfielder, defensive one. So we've got Fred, the Brazilian. We've got Brebner in the middle, and I needed a defensive midfielder and moved Kevin Muscat from right back into defensive midfield. And we signed Roddy Vargas as a centre back, and we went on to win the grand final 6-0. So a little bit of endurance and resilience, and we got there. And thanks to Jeff Lord, because if that had been a soccer board and president, I would have been sacked. There's no doubt about that.
And how difficult was that, when Victory was first founded, trying to create a brand new squad from scratch, trying to get them playing together, with some chemistry and all that sort of thing with players that didn't really know each other a few weeks ago?
Yeah, we were the last team to get together. I was the last coach appointed in the A-League. And but we had some talent from the VIS. I mentioned some of them. Adrian Leah came in, Steve Pantelidis, Billy Selesky. We eventually got a few boys in, and but having the right combination of senior players and the right mix in positions going forward, and having defenders that could attack, etc. It just, over time, it really worked out well for us. And Gary Cole was terrific in assisting in recruiting players. He really knows the game well. He's played 40 odd games for the Socceroos, and he played as a top player in the old NSL. Aaron Healy came from the VIS with me. He was one of the first years in the VIS, and then he came over as a coach. Anita Pedrana, a sports scientist, Anik Shodden, a doctor. So there was a lot of good quality people that come in, and like anything, it takes a little bit of time to build, but we built well. And for those first 6-7 years, Victory was a real force. There's always their downs and their ups, and they're just going through a couple of years of having a downer, but they're on their way back up again, and they're looking good under Tony Popovich.
Now, John Kosmina has mentioned when they signed, I hope it's John Cosmina, when they signed Romario, he pretty much wasn't happy with it because it ruined the whole flow of his squad and he was forced to play this big name player just to get fans in, all that sort of thing. Were you ever put in that situation? Obviously, Melbourne Victory is a huge club where you signed the huge player that you've had not much input into and it's messed up your team's chemistry, or have you always had the final say on what player you sign?
Unfortunately, I've always been at clubs that allowed me to have the final say. And I understand exactly what John Cosmina is saying there. And it's happened a few times. I don't want to name all the players. There's been some really good top level players come over. I'm really interested to see how Sturridge goes with Perth Glory, because I think he's a fantastic player when he's fit and healthy. He's been injured a lot, but he's the type of player I think should be signed. And it's so important to come with the right attitude. Rodwell at Wanderers, I believe, has got a tremendous attitude. Rhys Williams came back to play for Australia after being in England for a while. So there are a lot that work out, but it really has got to come down to the coach. If the coach, that's the expertise the coach has, who can fit into the team, what type of player they're looking for. And every coach that I know does their best to find out a little bit about the character of the players. And there's no doubt that I've phoned up about the character of a couple of players overseas, and I've been told one way or the other, there's a good character, or people I know have been pretty honest and said, oh, whatever you do, don't touch them, And fortunately, I've got connections over in Europe because I did my pro license over in Scotland. So it's handy having those contacts, but for some board member to say, oh, you should be signing such and such, and just go ahead and do it, they're destroying the team, really. It's really got to be a cohesive group and everyone's got to have empathy, trust, and cooperation. And once you get this interference from above, then you're best walking out of the club or leaving the club. But that's pretty tough to do, I guess.
Now, there's been a lot of talk in Australian football over the past week about Asia and the Asian Champions League. Now, you've played in the Asian Champions League with Melbourne Victory. Did you find that having to travel and take half your squad between the A-League and then all these different countries in Asia back and forth was really a hindrance on your season? Did you find it hard to focus on both competitions? And do you think the Asian Champions League is something that more A-League clubs should, aspire to winning aside from Western Sydney Wanderers?
I think the Asian Champions League is a tremendous competition, but it does present lots of problems for coaches of A-League teams. I remember traveling to Japan to play a game when I was at Newcastle, and we had to save some costs. We had to go through Korea and then Japan. We had to fit it in between two games. We had injuries. The Japanese team probably had a budget of around about $50 million on their players. We had around about 3 million or just less than 3 million. So you're up against it. There's no doubt about it. But I think it's still wonderful to have international competition. And there's a lot of good Asian teams, not only in Japan and Korea, but, Malaysia will start producing as well. Thailand, Vietnam, China. I played a pre-season tournament in China, and it was just great to see some of the teams that we played against, and their foreign players can be really high quality because they can afford it, but it's a great experience for our players. So win, lose or draw, I think it's a very worthwhile experience, and it was just great to see Tony Popovich win that championship.
Now, speaking of Asia, you've also had coaching experience in Asia. You mentioned earlier on Hong Kong, international football. How different did you find that to club football when you first stepped in?
I didn't find it too different at all, apart from two areas. One is it's very hard to get the players together on a regular basis because they've all got their club commitments. And the other thing is the time between games. I think I coached 5 games in a year. I was only there for 1 year. But life can be quite difficult when the board aren't too keen on having a foreigner coach the club, or not the club, the country. It's not really a country, it's an SAR, and the administration region of China. So it was lots of challenges and lots of presidents of clubs that weren't happy with having players released. In fact, I had a 3-year contract at Hong Kong, but I left after 12 months because I discovered that there was forces operating that I couldn't control. And in the last game I played, I think it was against Singapore, half of the starting 11 were unavailable through retirements, surprise secret injuries, players disappeared who didn't want to be contacted. And I thought, I don't see any light at the end of the tunnel here. So I called it quits. The CEO called it quits. And Steve O'Connor, he was the technical director. He didn't last much longer either. It's a pity because the media were terrific. They really wanted the country's team to do very well. And they were very supportive, which is unusual for the media. So they were terrific. The players were just a pleasure to coach. They were just tremendous. But there were other forces involved. So rather than fight it, I had enough. So I left after 12 months. I didn't get sacked from that. I usually get sacked.
Did you find it difficult coaching a country that speaks a different language to yourself? Obviously, you're Scottish, so us people in Australia can mostly understand you through the accent, but I can't imagine the players in Hong Kong would have had too easy of a time understanding you. So did you have a translator, and like what were some difficulties around that?
I hate to say it, but Hong Kong has got such a strong British connection, and which was only relinquished in 99, I think it was 1999. So English is a common language. Most Hong Kong people have their Chinese name and they have an English name, a British name. And surprisingly, a lot of them are old English names like Godfrey and Cecil. But I just found those people to be great to work with, and most of them understood my Scottish accent pretty well. I probably had more success there than I do in Australia. And Kiwi land, I had a wee bit of trouble as well, but again, another great place to coach. But no, I had an interpreter. The assistant coach spoke fluent English and obviously Cantonese. So it worked well. And I just really enjoyed my time in Hong Kong. I could have stayed for several years, but if a coach has got no chance in his mind of having success, there's no point in hanging around. And I came back and got the offer to go to Wellington, another foreign country over in New Zealand, which again, I thoroughly enjoyed.
Now, Wellington, that brings me on to the next question. I love how you're leading me into these segues. When you first joined Wellington, did you have any hesitation, considering the success you had at Victory, that you were going to have all this pressure on yourself, or were you coming into it with trying to give yourself a clean slate?
I don't think a coach thinks that far ahead. And let's face it, there's two types of jobs you can get. You take on a big club at the top and you're expected to win every week. So there's a lot of high expectation pressure comes with that. Wellington were in the bottom half of the table, as were Newcastle. And although people say, well, expectations lower, so anything you achieve is appreciated, it's not really like that. It's tough because you're working with probably, I found that the first group of players I took over at New Zealand were highly motivated, really good lads that just lacked a bit of technical and tactical knowledge. And but they loved everything that you did to try and help them. I always felt as though I was trying to help players develop. I think you coach a team, but you manage individuals, and they like that management individual sort of touch. And we didn't do that well. I think we finished second bottom in the first season, same as Deja Vu with Victory. But we made a couple of signings, we developed the squad, and the next year we finished third equal. And they scored more goals than they've ever scored. In fact, I don't think their record of goal scoring has changed. And being third equal, we played in the finals for the first time they did for a while. But it was just great working with them. I mean, Scots people, English, Scots people, Australian people, Hong Kong and Kiwis, you don't get much better people to work with and deal with. And very honest, upfront, nice, genuine people. No airs and graces, and I've still, in fact, we were on the phone earlier to my wife was talking to the wife of a board member we keep in touch with, I get invited over all the time. I've been over a couple of times, so I've got lots of friends still in New Zealand. Again, New Zealand was a 2-year contract, and then they offered me a 3-year contract, which I took. But after 3.5 years, the weather began to get to me a little bit. It was beginning to be a wee bit like Scotland with the weather and the wind. But a very tough team to coach for reasons out with in the control of the club. Lots of travel, and everything's an internet. Every trip overseas is an international trip, so it's customs and all that sort of stuff. To get to Perth was horrendous. To go through Melbourne, change, and go through to Perth and back again. So the boys were exhausted when they got there, and even more exhausted when they get back. But sometimes when we got back, we get told, look, don't unpack your bags. You're playing the next game in Christchurch. So it was a home game in Christchurch or Auckland or New Plymouth or Hamilton. And you're spending so much time traveling. So your recovery is compromised, but most importantly, your coaching sessions, you're trying to squeeze in coaching sessions here, there, and everywhere. So that was a big drawback. The other was that a lot of the players played for the national team, and because the A-League regularly did not respect international windows, you'd lose so many players 4 or 5 times a year. In one game, I lost 8 starting 11 players. So I just felt that, with the travel, limited budget, with the number of international players going off overseas. The other thing with the bottom half teams is you develop a player that do quite well. Nathan Burns did really well. Before you know it, he signed in Tokyo. So he's away over to Japan. So you lose him. Same with Andrew Nabu. We were in that first year at Newcastle. We looked pretty good heading in towards the finals, finished up in the grand final. Andrew left in January to go to Euro Reds. So you're losing players, you're competing with international windows, you're traveling enormously. So they didn't sack me. In fact, they asked me to stay on. They were very good. But I just felt as though it was time to come back to Australia. And that's when I got the Newcastle job.
Now, I do have one more Wellington Phoenix related question before we move on to Newcastle. Archie Thompson. Now, I know the media can sometimes fabricate transfer rumors to get clicks and this and that. This is a story I've seen, I think, at least once every couple of months about Archie Thompson possibly going to Wellington Phoenix to reunite with you. But I don't know how much truth there is in it. So just kind of straight up ask you, was there ever any truth into you approaching Archie Thompson for Wellington?
Archie, his agent, approached me, and I was very keen. He changed his mind, and I was pretty disappointed. And then he changed his mind back again. That happened about 3 times. And to finish up, we'd signed someone else, and we ran out of money and time. But Archie had an arrangement with Victory whereby if he stayed there, I think it was something like he'd be given a job at the club as an ambassador or something for another year or so. So I said, look, maybe you're best just taking that. You haven't made up your mind, which tells me you're not mad keen on coming to Wellington, despite being born in Wellington. I don't know if you knew that. He was born in Wellington, Archie. And I would love to have had him at Wellington. I just couldn't make it happen. We nearly did a couple of times, but it didn't quite happen. But I still felt, though, Archie was a really good player then, and he would have done a good job for Wellington. Plus, he would have been a great example to the younger up-and-coming players. Archie is an enigma. He was a tremendous bloke to coach after the first year. The first year, he was a nightmare. And I told him that. But when he came back from, where is it he went? Which club he went to? He went over to PSV to prepare for the World Cup, I think, in Germany or somewhere. And he didn't really get much of a run at PSV, and he came back, and his head was in the right place, in the right space when he came back. And he was just great to work with. Always had a laugh with Archie. I didn't honestly do a lot of coaching with him other than point him in the right direction. First half, Archie, we're going that way. He just did his own thing. He and Danny Allsop had a great arrangement and understanding. A lot of people didn't like Danny, but Archie gained so much from that type of bigger, stronger player, took the pressure off him, tackled hard, chased up everything. And when Danny left, I thought we'd struggle a wee bit. He went to Middle East, but Robbie Cruz came in and he was just terrific. He just performed exactly the same role. And then, of course, as soon as you develop a good player, off he went to Germany. But it was great to see. He did so well for himself. Another great lad to coach.
Now onto the Jets now for a minute. You mentioned you made the grand final in your first season, and the Jets were pretty much not expected to do much that season. So considering all the media, I think you called Fox Sports dickheads for not rating you guys.
Now, only 2 seasons ago, none of us mentioned you in the top 6 or anything like that. You made the grand final and should have won it, right? Last season, we all had you as one of the favourites. You didn't even make the top 6. So what do we got in store this season?
Well, I'm glad you lot have tipped us down the bottom, the useless dickheads.
We've been hammered already this season.
We've put together a good side.
All the media not giving you pretty much a chance, and the fact that you got to the grand final and almost won it, would you say that's your biggest achievement in club football?
My biggest achievement was winning a grand final 6-0 and Archie scoring 5 goals. That was just fantastic. With a sellout crowd at what used to be called Telstra Dome, is now called Marble Stadium. So that was the most enjoyable, biggest achievement ever from second bottom victory. So it was a similar climb. Newcastle had been 8 years out of the finals, usually bottom or second bottom of the league. But we just got the chemistry right. We signed a couple of decent players. Riley McGree was a very good signing for us. And we shouldn't have lost Andrew Nabut in January. But after the grand final, for the next 12 months, there was this, the players were moved on or got the opportunity to earn more money, and they were on contracts that allowed them to do that. So we lost 7 of the starting 11. And then, so the next year we finished 7th or 8th, which still wasn't too bad. We weren't too far away from the finals. Next year, we had again struggling to sign players. We had a lot of injuries. I lost my captain. But I was still really surprised that I was sacked. But then nothing really surprises me in football anymore. But I enjoyed it again. And Newcastle's a great place. It's a hidden gem, Newcastle. I used to always think of it as a gold mining and steel town, but it's not. It's a beautiful place with great beaches and a wine region that I still buy wine from, Scarborough wine. It's a beautiful, Hunter Valley is just spectacular. The weather is just great as well. So people, weather, the team all worked out well. It was just again a bit of a shock that I got sacked, and I was very disappointed. I don't know why the owner always got blamed for everything, because I found the owner terrific to deal with and work with. He invited me and my wife over to Shenzhen in China a couple of times, and he spoiled us rotten. He was a really, really nice, generous person, but I don't actually know what went wrong, but he's not the one to blame.
Now, speaking of going wrong, I don't really want to bring this up, but that grand final, unfortunately, the VAR system malfunctioned. Cost the Jets a goal that probably should have been ruled out, and you weren't able to get back into the match. So what's your thoughts on a whole of that match and that incident? Do you think that incident really rattled you guys for the rest of the match, or do you think it's a case of, well, that happened, but maybe you should have still fought your way back into the match later on, considering there was a lot of time left?
15. Does go towards Donachie, who met it at that far post, and it's Barbarouses, and it's touched in, and Victory have the advantage. Costa Barbarouses claiming the credit. It's the earliest goal ever in a grand final, and 4,000 Victory fans on the far side of the stadium go wild.
Now, James Donachie, well, that was my suspicion. That's offside. He's clearly offside. I mean, are we using VAR or not?
There was more of a interesting build-up to the game, not in the short term, but in the long term. A lot of coaches, including myself, were saying to the referees, you're allowing players, attacking players, to stand behind the wall, offside, and block runs. So the defenders can't run backwards because they're being blocked. we told the referees, the head of referees, everyone over and over again, they're offside, they're cheating, they're blocking, they're obstructing movement. Surely you're going to do something about it. And sure enough, it happened again. We were pretty satisfied that, and we found out later after watching the video, they were offside. There was 4 of them offside. And surprisingly, the VAR system went down just before and recovered just after the goal. That's a real surprise. I always said, I think the VAR is the future of the game. The trouble is, there was certain people involved in the A-League that were determined to be the first country to introduce the VAR without the technology. So there was a limited number of cameras, it still is, whereas in other countries, the cameras are, if you've seen rugby league, for example, they've got 6, 7 cameras, they've got everything lined up. They didn't have that and still don't, as far as I'm aware, in the A-League. And how can you run a system, especially one in a grand final that goes down? I said to the officials after the game, I said, why didn't someone just knock on next door and go into Fox and say, can we have a look at that vision? But, oh no, we're not allowed to. I mean, how stupid is that? So games are often won and lost on one goal. They've allowed it to happen. After that, I can't even remember how many chances we had, and it wouldn't have been too many. Victory shut the shop, and as they should do, and they did what they had to do to win the game. It wasn't their fault, they won the game, and they'd beaten Sydney on their way through. I think they finished 4th or 5th in the league. That they didn't have a great year, but they came good at the right time. But I've never been a big fan of introducing a system that requires on technology, and yet you don't have the technology available. Of course, if you say any of that, you get the phone call, you're rubbishing the game. And well, I'm not rubbishing the game. I'm just trying to make things better. Why don't you just get it fixed? But anyway.
I'd say there wouldn't be too many football fans that would disagree with you on that point. But on a more positive note, I want to talk about Riley McGree. You mentioned earlier that you signed him. It was a great signing. He's obviously moved on to Middlesbrough now. But can you tell me more about Riley during his loan stint with you guys? Because he really was... He come to another level, to be honest, when he played at Jets. So how did you get the best out of Riley McGree?
Well, when I sign players with the help of other people, Clayton Zane's a big help. He's a tremendous coach. It's Clayton. He had enough as well and left voluntarily at the end of the second year, I think. When I sign players, I look for 2 things. You're looking for their skill set, but you're also looking for their mindset. A mindset that's very positive, proactive, hardworking, enjoys what they do, open, honest, trustworthy, that type of thing. So to me, you can get good skill set, but you might not have the mindset. And if you have a really good mindset, you can make up for your lack of skill or speed in certain areas. So the mindset is almost more important. And to me, Riley had both. He was only 19 when we had him. He was very quick, very clever in tight areas, good vision, could score a goal, and could defend as well. And I remember after training one session, what improved our goal scoring, and again, it was another club where we scored more goals than they'd ever scored before. I think it was 57 that year, but there was a record year for goals. And to me, that's what the crowd come to a game for. They want to see goals. That's what gets them to their feet. That's the moment everyone enjoys, and the fans almost share it with the players. So I've always been very attacking minded. And what improved our shooting that year was behind the training goals, there was a big fence, but over the fence was a swamp. And in the swamp, there was red belly black snakes, which I used to make sure the players all knew. And then I introduced this rule: the ball goes over the fence, you've got to go and get your own ball and watch out for the snakes. so I saw Riley, and it's funny, the boys would prance around very carefully. And if you threw a stake to the side, they would jump thinking it was movement of a snake. Anyway, had a great time. But Riley came out of the swamp and I said, oh, any snakes in there? He says, no, none today. He says, apparently someone saw one yesterday. So there were actually red bellies there, which I didn't know. And I said, look, I really appreciate the fact that you've already played for the Socceroos, and here you are helping clear up afterwards. And he was very good at picking up the cones and helping the younger players clear up, because he was a young player, but he didn't have this attitude, I've played for the Socceroos, or I've been in a Socceroos squad, so I don't have to help out. So I always felt his mindset was right until he scored the that silly goal with the overhead kick that was called the scorpion kick by a commentator. And when the camera comes to my face, I'm not a happy chappy, because I just spent about a month talking to the players of shooting from outside of the box, tricks and flicks, just get in the box, one touch towards goals, you know, side foot, head, anything, but no tricks and flicks, and not from outside the area. So here he is, outside the area, tricks and flicks, over his head, terrific goal. And I was sort of annoyed at myself. I was sitting there thinking, that little bugger, he's just scored, and he's contradicted everything I've said. And now I've got to face the players about tricks and flicks, but it was just a great goal. I did laugh about it afterwards, but I wasn't happy at the time. But that goal actually got us into the grand final.
It had the potential to develop into a penalty conceding kind of situation, but Atkinson did well. The boy from... Oh my goodness! Oh my goodness! Have you seen a more freakish goal in A-League history? Riley McGree with a scorpion kick into the top corner. It's one of the most amazing things we've ever seen. Come on, Ernie, on your feet. That goal is going to go around the world and be shown over and over again. Riley McGree doing it on this stage.
Well, great touch, Georgescu. The 1-2 and the Rene Agita. I mean, just when you think you've seen everything. Look at Vazanis. He's just watched that sail over his head. It's not going to, is it? It's not. It's not. It did, you know. What an incredible effort from Riley McGree.
And he celebrates like he meant it. And he did. He did. He had to wait and see where the ball was going. And those fans in the active area can scarcely believe what they've seen. The entire bench except Ernie. Merrick keeping his cool, but we're level.
And I know it was pretty famous, the goal went around the world, but it was also pretty famous, as you said, the camera went to you, you weren't celebrating. To be honest, was there a part of you that wanted to just jump up and celebrate? Because personally, it's the best goal I've ever seen. Even though that, as you said, he contradicted everything you taught him, was there still a part of you that just wanted to embrace your inner football fan and just get up and clap?
Of course. Of course it is. I've always felt, though, I like to enjoy the end of the game when you've won. You know, part of the way through the game, it's not real time to celebrate, but I should have jumped up and clapped and cheered and then abused them afterwards in the change rooms. Nah, it was a great goal. It was, and those are special moments, as I said, and that's what the fans come to see, those special moments. So I probably did the wrong thing, but then that wouldn't be the only time I've done the wrong thing.
Now, it's been almost 2 years since you've been out of coaching now, unfortunately for us football fans in Australia who love to see you. So what would you say is the biggest thing you've missed about being a football manager in the time you've been away from the sport? Just
working with players and seeing them improve and develop, and just the whole excitement and the nerves that arrive on match day. And nerves are normal. It's a automatic physiological fight or flight response. So I didn't ever bother with nerves. If anyone says you're nervous, I'd say, yeah, of course, hopefully. If I'm not nervous, I haven't really put everything into this. But you just miss the working with players, seeing them develop, seeing them going out, win, having a look at the crowd, really enjoying themselves. So what I've done in the meantime, I've been working with Football Coaches Australia to help develop coaches. I've been doing some webinars, about to do some on-field work. And I've actually been working, which I can't really tell you too much about, in another code as well, in the coach development area. And so if I can't work with players, I've been working with coaches. So there's a scoop for you. You're now going to do your best to find out what I'm actually doing, aren't you?
2022's just started. Fortunately for some people who were sick of seeing 2021. So what can we expect to see from Ernie Merrick? Would you like to take another managerial offer, or are you happy with the two, football and the mystery code that you just alluded to doing that?
I don't think I'd ever say never coach again, but you're in the hands of the gods. You're very limited in what you can. I don't have an agent, never had an agent. There's been a couple of people that sort of spoken on my behalf, but I found that as a coach, you're one of two people in the eyes of most board members. You're either too young and inexperienced or over the hill. You're never right in the middle. So I don't know where I am. I suspect I'm over the hill, but every coach has really got to innovate and change and become a completely different coach every 5 years, I think. If you don't regenerate and rethink the game, you'd be coaching like 10 years ago. And you've really got to reinvent yourself. And you've got to have an opportunity to reinvent yourself. But having said that, I'm enjoying working with coaches, Football Coaches Australia, and doing my other job as well, which is very exciting.
And obviously it's hard to tell from a fan's point of view what a person's like with how the media puts them out, because the media can really pick and choose the narrative. So would you say the media's pretty much got it spot on with what type of person Ernie Merrick is? If not, what type of person would you say Ernie Merrick is that the media hasn't seen?
I think the media person is portrayed in a way, not through design. It just happens. There's a lot of people I've met who are coaches in the media, Mickey Malthouse, Craig Bellamy, all the soccer coaches. I know them all pretty well in the A-League, and coaches in other areas. And what you see is usually nothing like what's portrayed, because when you're under pressure in a match, for example, you're either focused on the game, or the last thing you're thinking about is trying to be open and friendly with everyone and performing for people. You are what you are. And but I have to say, when I speak publicly, people are usually quite surprised. I'm being Scottish. I've got a sense of humour that I like to explore, and it often is a bit of a surprise to some people, although other people probably think I'm a pain in the neck, and I don't blame them for that either. So I don't know. I have to say, the media, I sounded like I was having a go at the media. The media are crucial in any sport, and the vast majority of people I've dealt with, 95% in the media, are just fantastic. All the guys at Fox, for example, I found them terrific. Hopefully they're the same at Paramount and Channel 10, although some have come over. So I feel the media do a very important job and a very good job, and Fox was great. I'm sure Paramount will do a great job. Danny Townsend's the CEO of the APL, and he's the right man to be doing that job. And I think our game's very strong and getting stronger and getting better, and the skill quality is going up. And some of the games have been very exciting, because I think the coaches are learning it's all about attack and make it exciting and have a bit of fun. Don't park the bus, you're wasting your time. And it's good to see some young up and coming coaches in Australia getting a go as well.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Ernie. It's been an absolute pleasure.
No, it was my pleasure, Shannon. And don't change my image too much, please. Hang on, I'll get the face for you. How's that?
That's perfect. Thank you, Ernie. Thank you for watching. This video is sponsored by Arrow Sport. Go to the link in the description, and the friendly team at Arrow Sport will help you create your own football dream jersey. Whether it's starting from scratch or using one of their many templates on their website, creating a jersey with Arrow Sports is easy, and prices start from just $50. Go to www.arrowsport.com.au and make your football kit dreams become a reality.